Welcome to I Hate It Here, the podcast for HR and people professionals, making the hardest job in the world just a little bit easier. I'm Hiba Youssef.
Work is personal, whether we want to sort of admit it or not. I think we talk a lot about how it's not, but it is. We bring our culture, our lives, our traumas, grief, all of it, we bring it to work. And I think the organizations that are successful are the ones that are recognizing that and like setting up a system that welcomes all of those emotions, because what they're going to see in the end are highly productive employees.
Welcome back to another season of your favorite podcast, I Hate It Here, with your host, me, Hiba Youssef. Wow, that was really funny. I've never introduced myself before. If people have been listening to me for multiple seasons, they're like, what is she doing this season? I'm having fun. When I started thinking about this season, I like to have themes for every season. And I kept coming back to this theme of like hard truths, because I really wanted to do a whole episode dedicated to feeling burnt out, because I have felt burnt out a lot of times in my career. And that's actually what inspired the whole theme this season. So this season, you're going to meet guests that are willing to talk about the hard things like feeling burnt out, or like your career is going nowhere and not knowing what you're going to do. And I'm especially excited for my guests today, because when I started thinking about what does it mean to talk about burnout? Who do I want to talk about it with? I really want to talk about it with somebody who understands it and has a knowledge and expertise around it. So today you're going to meet my friend Eva. And Eva Bak is a strategic people leader with 15 years of experience spanning talent acquisition, career development, and employee engagement. She has a deep commitment to inclusive practices and values-driven cultures. She's collaborative, employee first, and really thinks about building long-term strategies that help both businesses and humans thrive. Known for her exceptional communication, storytelling, and critical thinking, she constantly delivers high-impact initiatives that help individuals and organizations thrive. Keyword there, both of those things. Her passion lies in enabling others to achieve their best, both at work and in life. But I think she also would say that she has another really big passion around mental health. So Eva, welcome to the pod.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
I feel like we've had so many serious conversations with each other over the years. From our first meeting to now. Actually, most recently, fun fact, I had breakfast and we might have like cried at breakfast, or I might have cried. I feel like
we did.
Okay,
we did.
I cried. Like, did you cry? I was crying. It's always interesting when you meet people that just create the space to let you feel whatever you want to feel. And so I feel really thankful, one, that we're like friends, and two, that you work in this industry where a lot of us are really struggling with burnout and don't really have the capacity or the support system to really feel the things we want to feel. So welcome to the pod. Okay, getting into it. This season, I said hard truths. So I'm asking every guest, because I love my one little guest question. What is one hard truth about work?
I'll get into it, and I promise. But I first want to just say something, because it's related to the topic of today, that I want to just say that it's amazing, the journey from basically listening to this podcast on all my subway rides home from work, and how it's like relieved stress off my shoulders. And now here I am. And I hope in some ways I will do the same to someone that might be riding public transportation somewhere. But yes, a hard truth. My hard truth is, I think people often imitate leadership instead of calling it out. And I think there are different reasons for it, right? Sometimes people are not aware, and maybe their early career and they look up to the person, or maybe they've just started the job, they're excited and they're trying to fit in, which is a normal human behavior. But the other side of it is more like the Stockholm syndrome. You're doing it for survival. And I think that is one that, obviously to watch out for. It relates to the topic of burnout, but it's something I've seen time and time again. And it's definitely something, to be aware of.
I love that. That is such a good truth. It's like, sometimes I feel like I'm play acting at work. Like I see other leaders and I'm like, do you really mean that thing that you just said? Or are you just going through the motions to act like you are a leader? And I think employees are getting really smart and quick and sharp about telling the difference between those who are imitating and those who actually are trying to lead in tough moments.
Oh, Oh, I mean, especially I would say like this, like new generation coming in at the risk of sounding super old. Um, they just can call out bullshit. They know when we're not being authentic, and it's wonderful. And it's a good way to sort of keep yourself in check and like realizing like, oh wait, I'm not being authentic right now. I'm trying to fit in. I'm immolating instead of like bringing yourself to work. And sometimes people don't feel safe to do so, but that's also a signal, like signal to what am I doing here? Should I stay? How can I make change?
Yeah. Something really interesting in your bio, I really touched on your role as like an HR and people leader, but
Mm-hmm.
you had potentially a different trajectory early in your career. Like, can you touch a little bit on that part?
Yes, absolutely. So since I was 11 years old, very specific, I said I'm going to be a psychologist. So I did go that direction. I was a mental health therapist for years before I went into HR. And I worked with, many different types of populations. I did marriage therapy for a little while before I was married. Fun fact. So that was a very interesting experience. And I still got married even after all that. So
I still believe in this institution.
yeah, I'm like I'm with it. And it was just a natural thing for me to go into HR from there. I felt like so many of the skills that I learned as a mental health therapist through the education and actually practicing it were so applicable to the field. And I think it's a theme that actually is, brought up in these podcasts a lot.
Yep.
Even like, I think the last one you had was about trust. I listened to it recently, and yeah, it's there's so many themes, and it's becoming increasingly important to be aware of mental health in the workplace.
Yeah, I wish like there was a time during COVID where employees would come to me for things. I've told this story so many times, and I would literally have to be like, that is a conversation to be had with your therapist.
Yeah,
I am your HR person. But I do think there's this like really interesting blurry line where like we're not trained as mental health professionals, but a lot of the things we encounter in work could be outcomes of somebody's mental health where they're struggling with their mental health, right?
absolutely. I mean, the amount of hours they spend at work, right? And then also, what are people looking for at work? They're looking to feel safe. And honestly, HR is the first line of defense very often. So learning how to navigate those tricky situations is important, because it's very important to pay attention to those moments and not dismiss it, right?
Well, today I want to dig into more of that, but also talk a little bit about burnout. So it was
Yeah.
really funny when I was thinking about how I wanted to start this season. I was like obsessing over this idea that I wanted to do an episode called I'm Burnt Out Now What? Because I talked to so many of my friends, and it's just an exhausting time to be in HR. It's been exhausting, candidly, since 2020. I think it's gotten even more complicated with just the state of the world in the US states, where I feel like it's an added layer of complexity that we were already struggling with, like the pivot to remote work, dealing with AI. And now there's like very various things happening in the world impacting our employees, impacting us and our ability to show up. And I was going through a period of time where I just felt deep exhaustion in my bones. Like I would
Mm.
show up and nothing was inspiring me. And I was like, what is going on? I love this job. I've like dedicated my life
Mm.
to fucking HR and people ops. Like, why do I not feel any sort of excitement or inspiration about what's going on? And I think I
Mm.
like diagnosed myself where I was like, maybe I'm just like really burnt out. And I started talking to
Mm.
my friends, my family, my doctor. And I really wanted to do an episode about that because I think a lot of HR people are struggling with burnout right now. So when it comes
Mm.
to that, like in your expertise, like how would you actually define burnout?
Yeah, so I mean, absolutely, seeing it all across like the field of HR, but also in other fields. I think
Yeah.
it's difficult to be a human right now. I mean, said very simply, but I think it's important to recognize just what you just said, like all the things that are happening in terms of defining it. I think it's important to recognize, like, sometimes people get confused about I'm stressed or I'm burned out, and so I
Yeah.
just want to take a moment to sort of like boil that down a little bit. Stress is normal, right? Stress is it's also beneficial for us. Like in the back in the day when we felt stressed out because a lion was running towards us, like this was for our survival, it was for our benefit.
Yeah.
But when it comes to burnout, what you're really dealing with is a moment in which the stress is taking over and you can no longer process it. So these stress cycles that happen every single day, you're stressed because you have to give a presentation. You're stressed because you are late for, I don't know, the bus. Those moments, you go through them, right? You might be late for the bus, but then you get on the bus, you sit down, you have a sigh, maybe you read a book, and the stress cycle was finished. But what happens when you go through stress cycle after stress cycle and you're not completing it? So you're just walking around with a bunch of unfinished stress cycles. And that is really what leads to burnout. And of course, that comes on more so when you are, given a bunch of tasks and you have too many things on your plate. You mentioned COVID. I mean, HR professionals specifically, we had so many jobs, including being a nurse. I mean, the things we had to know about, diseases and things like that. And so the stress that we were experiencing at that moment, and so often in HR, because our responsibility is everything. And I think you've talked about that before in the pod. It's an interesting field. It's fascinating because of that. But the fact that almost everything can be sort of falls on HR's plate is also, I think, why we're so much more vulnerable to burnout and to not finish these stress cycles. And then on top of that, being like a helping profession and not taking the time for ourselves, not having that moment when we are the ones going to HR and saying, this is what's going on. And then someone else is going to say, oh, this maybe is a conversation for your therapist. Yeah. Like even just that, we don't have that at work very often. And I think that is part of why we're not able to finish the stress cycles. And it's very damaging, and it shows up just like how you just described it. It shows up in not feeling motivated, not feeling passionate. You lose belief in what you once had belief in. In the case of, well, you invited me to the pod. I'm going to say honest.
I'm like you're describing the really intense things I have felt, and I haven't really had an outlet to talk to anyone about it other than like my doctor, my therapist, my friends. Sure. So actually I do have a lot of outlets, and now this podcast, but I mean,
that's beautiful.
Tough, but it's tough. Like when you care so much about this work, when I meet some of the most incredible and amazing people in HR. And the thing that comes back to them every single time is how much they care, where they're almost to a point where they're willing to put everything before themselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
that's also, it's why we're more vulnerable to it. Like the caring bit, but also, and I think this really goes deep into my passion in life, which is like finding your meaning. When I was a therapist, I didn't mention it, I was mostly practicing as an existential therapist. So like you start with basically like finding out what are people's values, like what's meaningful for them in their lives. And then you go from there. Like that is your starting point. And I think at work more and more so, because so many institutions have broken down around us, like we're not always around, family institutions, spiritual institutions. Our work becomes the place where we long and look for a sense of meaning. We want to feel important. We want to feel seen. And when all that doesn't happen, it especially for people who are going into this profession and wanting to make a difference, right? Especially for people, like that's why people go into HR most of the time. When that doesn't happen, when you are, for example, not recognized by your manager, or when the company is always blaming HR when things go bad, but then when things go, is successful, they're not getting the credit. And how we work so much in the shadows, right? So much of our work is also confidential. So if you look at the greater picture of HR, it's obvious in a way why we're more susceptible to burnout, because we're not in the front line getting in the sense of like getting the sales done and then getting the best salesperson of the year award because of we're not getting that. That's not, or this year, the HR leader was able to avoid any lawsuits. Here's the trophy. No, it doesn't happen. So I think that's also why, and also to go back to your point of how much you love your job.
Yeah.
One of the aspects of burnout is that often it starts with a honeymoon period. And that's the interesting part. And that's the hook. So especially when you start a new job, you're over the moon, you're euphoric, you love it, you love the leadership, you're excited about the opportunity, you're connecting with the people in those first months, and you have this vision of all the things you're going to change. I think that describes a lot of our experiences as coming in as HR. And then it starts to break down, and perhaps we realize the job description, posted online was different than the actual job, right? That's number one.
Far too many times.
Yeah, there's cracks in the leadership, et cetera, et cetera. But what happens then very often is we are addicted to that first feeling, and so we stay. And so we keep doing, and then we work more. We work more and more in order to like achieve that feeling that we had in the beginning. And that is one of the crucial aspects of burnout, is this almost like trying to like overwork yourself to deliver results that we once saw at the beginning. And so, yeah, I think that also is a big factor.
I feel like you were describing many relationships in my life outside of work. So thank you for that. As you were describing that, I was like, I think I'm having an existential crisis right now, because I mean, when I thought about this episode, my goal is that everyone listening kind of leaves this with like a better understanding of what burnout is. Cause I do feel like sometimes I flippantly say things like I'm burnt out, and I like kind of like laugh it off. And it's like, no, it's not, it's actually like not funny. There's like a deep impact to me, like physically, mentally, emotionally, that I think I wish I even understood more. So I'm just like so grateful you're here and sharing your knowledge and expertise. Like, it's super helpful to me. I'm sure it's helpful to everyone listening. So just thank you. I'm going to keep saying thank you throughout this entire episode, because I feel like you're lifting a burden off my shoulders a lot of times when we're talking about this, because it feels good to feel seen. And I think, like you said, a lot of our work is invisible. I often say like our work is felt way before it's actually seen. And so like our employees are feeling it, and they know that we're working really hard for them, but like who's taking care of us? So I hope that this episode is like taking care of HR is really my goal. And also to talk about like my personal struggle with burnout too.
Yeah. I'm here for you.
Everyone's struggling. I just want us all to be like open and honest. If you are thriving in these times, congratulations. A lot of us are not. And I think it's fair to say like we do need more support. You touched on a few things like that honeymoon period, but what are some other important factors that could potentially contribute to like HR feeling burnt out today?
I think that, HR very often is an under-resourced department, right? We're looked at as a cost center and not always as, driving the success of the company. And I think a lot of, I've never talked to an HR person who told me I have everyone I need on my team.
Yeah.
But, I'm like, raise your hand or like write me on LinkedIn. I'd like to meet you.
Never in my life have heard that either. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, it's not to in any way diminish or forget that a lot of departments are understaffed, right? It's not, but I think just HR just has this extra aspect of it that it's misunderstood a lot of the times. And because the results it's difficult sometimes to understand our effect and our contribution. So I think that's one aspect. I think the other is just the sheer amount of change that's happening in the world.
Oh my God, yeah.
And what our employees need from us is constantly shifting.
Yeah.
And trying to understand how to respond to that appropriately. And then on top of that, having our inner life. We are also a person, right? And I have actually had to say that at work.
You don't say.
I'm also a person.
Experience this workplace to like, it's my top performing post on LinkedIn of all time, where I'm like, your HR person is also an employee. You all realize that. So like whatever you're dealing with, we are also possibly feeling the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's kind of insane that that's something we have to tell people. But it also goes back to this idea of like HR being like a helping profession and we are there for everyone else. And then you sort of just label it as the receiver of all the problems and all of that. But yeah, no, I definitely think that's an issue. I think that lack of community can be an issue for HR, which I am so thankful that I have found this community and other communities out there. But it took me a long time. And a lot of HR professionals don't know that there is a community out there. That's another thing. We don't have colleagues the same way other people have colleagues. And if
I
you
can't,
look at,
I
right,
can't,
I mean,
I
because
can't
we,
like shit talk employees with other employees, you know?
no, you cannot. You cannot vent or get or sort of finish that stress cycle that we talked about, which sometimes is venting. I'm actually a fan of venting. I think some people say it's talking bad about people. No, this has always been like that throughout the humanity. Is you need to let these things exit your body.
Yeah.
HR does not have that luxury. We hold it on our shoulders, in our bodies, and in our minds. And if you look at what is like the number one thing that makes people live longer, it's community and
And
connection. And we spend all these hours at work every day not really having that. And that's wild. Like that's, and it's difficult to really figure out how to get it, but definitely things like community and like things like this, being able to listen to other people that are going through similar things, sharing resources is another thing. All other professions, it's like, hey, this is what I'm learning. But for so many years, like it was super siloed, like because it was confidential, right?
yeah.
Most of the things we do. So I think that's a big, a big aspect of it as well. It's just that lack of community at work. I've certainly missed it at times myself throughout my career.
Yeah, it's so interesting because when we started Safe Space, so Safe Space is my community of people leaders. It's about, I think we have 6,000 members right now, which is kind of insane. And wild to think that we started as like a tiny group in Slack and now we have like a whole platform we're on. But when we started Safe Space, first of all, the name came to me at like 3 a.m. because I was sitting up in bed thinking about like HR doesn't have a safe space. But part of the reason I was the most excited about the community was I had like no one to talk to about my HR stuff. Like, yes, I have my internal team member who's also HR and can keep things confidential. But sometimes I just want to go vent about my CEO and be like, hey, does anybody have a particularly thorny CEO who wants it done this way? Like, how would you deal with them? Or, hey, I
Mm.
have this really tricky employment issue. Like, does anyone know an answer to this quickly before I have to go call outside counsel? And so I was really thinking like, we never had that. Even on LinkedIn, when we show up on LinkedIn, we almost always have to show up as the HR representative of the company. We don't get
Yep.
the luxury of showing up as ourselves. And I wanted to foster and create a space where we could show up like ourselves, which is why in Safe Space, you can also post anonymously because I was like, we
Mm.
need the opportunity to just like say something without it
Mm.
being attributed to where we work or who we are. And I don't know, watching that community grow has been like the joy of my life. But also when I'm like super stressed and you're right, I need to complete that stress cycle. I
Mm-hmm.
head over there and I just like let it rip because I'm like, I need to let this off my chest and then I need to
Mm-hmm.
move on with my life. So, I mean, I feel you, HR, really, we were siloed for so long, almost like
Mm-hmm.
othered in our own workplaces
Mm-hmm.
because of the nature of our work. So I do think like finding a community, whether it's Safe Space, whether it's any of the other various communities out there, like finding your community could be a step forward in just closing that stress cycle and like alleviating potential burnout you might be facing.
Absolutely. And by the way, anyone listening, if you're not in safe space, which you probably are, you should join. It's been
That's what we
slight
did.
plug. It's been amazing and I dare say life changing. I mean, really, just like bringing back joy in HR because again, community brings joy. I think there was one more thing I wanted to mention because it's related to that. I think the loneliness of HR, which is
Yeah.
the dual loyalty of employees and the business. You are in between. I like to use analogies, and I often use the analogy that you're a child of divorce in some ways, and you are constantly going to one parent, saying one thing and another, and trying to create harmony between the two.
Mm-hmm.
And really, the motivation to do that is the same. You want to see good results. You want to have a workplace that supports the employees and a successful business, which then in turn supports the employees. And HR
Yeah.
understands that so well. We live and breathe that every day. But actually being in it is so hard
Mm.
because I feel like we're always defending, almost like when you have to pitch something to leadership about an initiative, and it's basically like pitching to investors. Like you have to show up with a deck, and I mean, we talk a lot
Data.
about like support data,
Yeah.
and I
All
mean,
this.
but wait a second, like you hired me, just do what I say. No, I'm joking. But really, it's like that. And then when you go back to the employees, you have to, look over your communication 500 times to make sure,
Yep.
are you properly communicating back to them what is happening?
Yep.
And I think that is very difficult. That it just creates a tension, because in reality, both sides are always sort of questioning your intention and what you're trying to
Yeah.
do.
That is the childhood divorce is actually so funny because I do feel like out of all the roles at a company, and I'm going to ask this question next, so I feel like I'm teeing it up perfectly, but like we are constantly between the business and the employees, and being stuck in that push and pull when we also are employees too is so different than any other department. And so like my next question is about that, like burnout. How does burnout specifically show up in HR roles? And kind of like, have you thought about what makes it different from burnout in other departments? Do you think it's that we play that dual role that really sets us apart from other departments?
Yeah, I definitely. I mean, again, I want to recognize I do think this is a very human experience,
Yeah.
and everyone experiences, but burnout. But in HR, we don't get a lot of feedback. I think we have to ask for it a lot of the time. And again, we don't have sales numbers that are just like in front of our face showing what we've achieved for the month.
Yeah.
And human beings thrive knowing if they're going in the right direction, if they have a career path, if there are ways that they can really make an impact. And I
Mm.
really believe this is one of the hardest parts, is that it's not well defined what means success in HR. And who's defining it, if any? You
Yeah.
are, right? The HR person is. So that's okay. Wait, so I have sat through performance reviews where I gave myself a performance review the entire time, because
Same.
I mean, yeah, and like we're very harsh on ourselves, but I
Yeah.
think because we are also the ones like basically teaching leaders how to do it, coaching them
Yeah.
in how to do it. And so we end up, and that is different for HR, right? There is usually a sense of feedback in other roles, and
Mm.
you have a better sense of whether or not you're successful. So that ambiguity is difficult. And then HR people very often feel as though they have to carry everything on their shoulders. And perhaps even when they've stepped out of that, they were not received well.
Mm.
Saying, wait, I'm also here. I also have needs. I can't stay to the end of the holiday party and clean up because
Yeah.
I also want to go home to my children or something like that.
Yeah.
And so it's also that sense of we are carrying it. And that definitely looks different in HR than other professions. And we don't have anyone to speak to about it. So we don't have anyone to catch it early. I would like to think that most HR professionals are looking at their employee base and
Yeah.
looking out for warning signs of burnout.
Yeah.
But who's looking out for ours?
Who's looking out for ours? What are some more? Well, that's a good question. Like, what are some warning signs that people should be looking out for, either in employees and within HR?
Yeah, sure. I think over productivity or under productivity. So at either extremes, right?
Okay.
So the over productivity falls into the camp of what I mentioned earlier of the honeymoon phase. You were well received, you're excited about the company, and then things start going in the wrong direction, and you're just trying so hard to get back to that first
Mhm.
recognition that you got in the first place. And now you're working harder and harder and harder because you think this feeling I have inside, surely it's going to get better if I
Yeah.
just keep performing. That's one way. So I would pay attention to that. Obviously, the underperforming as well. Someone might have shut down. Our memory is very affected by burnout because our bodies are essentially trying to preserve whatever is left of
Yeah.
us in that moment. And also, it's hyper focused on something different, which is survival. But that's a little bit of a different conversation. So I think underperformance and overperformance. The other thing is, this is a weird one, but I think it's interesting, and I've seen it before. When I have noticed either a neutral or consistent neutral or very positive feedback about someone's manager, I'm also a little bit on the alert because I'm thinking, are
Really?
they really excited about their manager? Oh, I have like a noise in the background. Or are they trying to shield the manager because the lack of, like, the connection has decreased, and there's essentially not a support system there in place for them. So I think that can also be a vulnerability. I definitely tend to dig deeper when I hear a consistent neutral or very positive feedback about someone's manager.
That's so interesting. I'm going to put this one down to also think about this one because I do see this a lot and I never thought about it that way. And I'm also laughing at the irony of like an ambulance going by as you're talking about this.
Oh, you heard it?
Oh, I heard it. Listeners, if you hear it, that is not intentional. That just is the world giving us a message in the form.
I
No,
mean, it was very appropriate, right?
in New York
Yeah.
City, I am not surprised. When I lived in DC, I lived by the firehouse and I got sirens all the time. And I was like, I just became numb to it, honestly. I'm like not even attuned to it anymore. But I thought it was really interesting that you brought that as you're talking about the symptoms of burnout that happens.
Well, I mean, and also it relates to two other points, which is, someone not taking PTO, for example, or sick frequently. So all of
Yeah.
these things can be signs of burnout. With someone.
I think it's like an interesting thing I have observed in corporate America. And this is a broad generalization. So don't be getting mad at me for this. I'm prefacing it with like, maybe this is a broad generalization. I have noticed when I'm working with leaders who are a little bit more junior or maybe like early in their career of managing or leadership, when they have a performance problem at work, their first instinct is, oh, so and so just can't do the job, and they basically like distill it down to the lowest common denominator of like ability. And I always come in and my first questions are, okay, like, okay, did you set expectations? Okay, like, do they understand what they're required to do? Then I'll ask the question of, hey, do you know if there's anything going on in like their life? And sometimes managers are like, well, why are you asking that? And I'm like, because like our performance at work, it's not just like a, a, a a symptom of like being able to do the job. A lot of things impact our ability to do our job at work outside of just knowing how to do the job. And so I think it's like a really interesting observation I've had that a lot of times managers and leaders kind of default to the, well, they just don't know how to do it, instead of asking the question of maybe there's something else going on here.
Oh, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I mean, work is personal, whether we want to sort of admit it or not. I think we talk a lot about how it's not, but it is. We bring our culture, our lives, our traumas, grief, all of it. We bring it to work. And I think the organizations that are successful are the ones that are recognizing that and like setting up a system that welcomes all of those emotions, because what they're going to see in the end are highly productive employees, because that's how we react to support and being seen, or someone taking the time to ask us how we're doing. Or again, to your point, instead of jumping straight to, oh, you're not the right fit for this job, or you're underperforming, or you're making mistakes, jump to what's going on and can I help? Assume the best.
Yeah. Because I mean, like, it's sad, but our system rewards people who produce work. Like, that is our system in a nutshell. And so, by simply caring about someone, it's shocking they'll produce better work. Who'd have thunk that that's a thing, you know? not
Yeah.
just us. I feel like everyone listening to the pod's like, yeah, obviously.
Yeah.
On the note of personal things, I want to ask a personal question. Like, have
Sure.
you had an experience where, like, in a moment you realized you were burned out yourself, or you were like on the path to that? Like, how did you
Hmm.
handle it?
Yeah, sure. I mean, going back to the stress cycle thing, how when you just experience too many that you've not been able to process, a lot of the times it shows up in the body. And and for me, I mean, time and time again, that's how it really shows up. And I did have an experience where I just kept getting sick. And even like antibiotics weren't even working. Like it was crazy. And I went to get tested for my immune system. Everything was fine. Um, I actually took a vacation. And I know, and I'm not trying to sit here and say like, this is the solution to the problem. I hope I'm not coming across like that. But what it did for me is taking that vacation, it allowed for those stress cycles to complete.
Yeah.
And that's also why, by the way, that sometimes you can take that vacation after a very difficult time and actually come back more exhausted or
Yeah.
even get like sick from it
Yes.
because
Yeah.
your body is finally saying, oh, we are now able to deal with the stress. So you're almost pulling the stress back out of the hat. And the body is saying, let's deal with it. So it's
Mm,
no longer living in your body. And unfortunately, that very often just falls during the time period of your vacation. But yeah, I mean, in my case, it was a lot to do with like gaining clarity. I think a lot of people, when they're burned out, are have lost their clarity about their situation. They're living in
mhm.
denial. I think that in work situations where we know we are burnt out and it's not working, there are other things we have to care about, such as paying your bills. And that is the denial piece, right? It's our bodies and our minds know long before we're able to accept it. This isn't working. It's not the right situation for you for whatever reason, but it takes a long time for it to manifest and for us to listen to it very often. And the body speaks louder than anything. So yeah, the way I dealt with it was taking that vacation, gaining the clarity and the perspective, looking at it from far away and going, you know, this isn't a healthy situation.
Yeah. For me, when I've been there, I've then made like I have to change something plan, because you're right. Like, so many of us have bills to pay. You can't just say, like, walk back into work and be like, I'm good. Like,
Yeah.
see ya. I wish I had that luxury. I think a lot of, like, that would be an incredible safety net. But I think when I've been in those situations, truly, I have walked out and been like, I have to make a plan to change something, because I cannot continue like this. Like, one of my jobs, my like arms were going numb, and my doctor was like,
Mm,
we've like sent you to get an MRI. We've like, the neurologist has seen it. It looks good. Like, I, I really think like you are operating under like a lot of stress at work, and potentially you should like explore a different career path, or like a different
mm,
job. And I was like, okay, lady, I got to pay my bills. Like, no, I can't just like not, I got rent. Like, I can't just
yeah.
not work. But I think she did, her calling it out to me was, I was like, okay, something has to change. And I like worked after that it at work. So I didn't want to leave that. I didn't want to leave that
Mm,
organization. I genuinely like loved the people. I actually went back to my bosses and was like, we need to set some boundaries about like what I can and cannot
mm-hmm,
accomplish as a team. Like, we don't have the bandwidth and the resources to do this. So we need to scale
mm-hmm,
back. And like, thankfully, I had managers
mm-hmm,
that were willing to take on more, that were willing to say no to things, that were willing to push things
mm-hmm.
down and say, this is not a priority, don't focus on it. And they were willing to help me. But I've also been in environments where that's not the case, and I've had to make the choice to leave.
Absolutely. I mean, boundaries are such an important word here, and gaining the perspective and then going back and trying to set boundaries is the right move.
Hard.
Um,
It's
but I
hard.
also want to really empathize because I think when you're in the midst of like a deep burnout situation, you don't have the energy to set boundaries. And worse, you don't even believe in the boundaries. You don't believe that setting boundaries would work because there's a hopelessness to the situation. And I think that's what I really like, why I want to say excited to be here today, because I really think it's important for people to hear that. I think that when we say we're burnt out, people are very fast to throw a bunch of solutions to the problem of, yeah, create boundaries, talk to this person, remember to take your lunch break, I mean, the
Do the
usual.
walk.
And Yeah, take a walk. And by the way, and we can get to that a little bit too, because those things are important and they do matter. The simple things are actually the answers. But in when you have gotten to that point, and I think that's sort of the definition of burnout, you're not stressed, you're burnt out.
You're
You
out. Yeah.
are, yeah, yeah. And like you have decision fatigue, it's difficult to make decisions.
Ooh,
Um, and and again, like you're not necessarily like standing up for yourself or others the same way, because there's a part of you that doesn't believe it's worth it. It's not,
mm,
you feel powerless in a way. And this is obviously, there's a range of what being burnt out can feel like. I'm probably describing the more severe.
extreme. Yeah.
Yeah.
What, like, we touched on this lightly, but I want to come back
Mm.
to this. Like, why do you think HR professionals are so prone to burnout? Like, do you think it really is we care so much? Like, not, again, not to go dabble in broad generalizations, but I feel like you're just the things that you've been describing about burnout and talking about and the personal experiences you and I are sharing, it just feels like it's universal. Like, every HR person I know has shared something similar, either from the simple to the severe burnout. Like, is it HR? Is this just like a high burnout career? Like, what is it?
I think it is. And I'm going to get into a couple of points, but I also just want to mention that the majority of HR professionals in the world are women.
Mm,
When you go to a conference and you look around the room, it's a lot of women. And I don't want to leave this podcast without recognizing, the difficulty of what a woman in modern day society has to carry. And again, it's not taking away from a man in HR that's going through, having the same experience, and we can get to why they're HR specific. But I also think it's important, and maybe this is a hot take, I don't know, but I think it's important to recognize, the juggling of all that it is to be in HR and
yeah.
being a woman. But going back to like the HR specific, yes, I think there's also the type of person that goes into HR and
Mm,
what their vision of what they want to accomplish is, right? They want to make a change. They want to touch people. They want to be a resource. Maybe they had a bad experience at work and they want to make it better for others. There's a strong need for helping. And that, I mean, you can also look at teachers and nurses, all the helping professions
yeah.
have literature surrounding, the burnout syndrome of being a helper. So absolutely, that's part of it. And going back to what we discussed earlier, like the lack of community within the organization and the job itself, the lack of recognition that nothing is really obvious of the work. We are there for 8 hours or 9 hours or however many hours we're there. And at the end of the day, no one saw anything we did because we dealt with preparing a termination, or we dealt with a leader that needed coaching on how to navigate change, or all these other aspects that we are responsible for. But it
Yeah.
looked like we did nothing.
Some days I'm like, wow, did I do nothing or did I do everything? And then I look at
Yeah.
my calendar and I'm like, oh, hell no, I did way too much today. Right?
Yeah, no, I mean, for sure. And I think also I advocate for this a lot. And I've had to advocate for this starting with myself. It's just be very intentional about how you make your job and your work visible. And that
Mm,
is a part of being in HR, I think, these days, is
yeah.
knowing how to show that the work you're doing is getting done.
Yeah. It's tough because, like, I struggle with helping people understand, like, a termination is not just a termination. Like, it's not just I make some paperwork, I write a script, I have a conversation. There's also this, like, emotional part of our job that I, it's hard to quantify. It's hard for me to be like, hey, I had a really long and hard day because I had to terminate somebody. Like, when you say that, someone's like, oh, that's like part of your job, though. But it's like, how do you explain to them that, like, you are also then dealing with the emotional labor of caring and having empathy for someone who just experienced job loss?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's so, and it's interesting because I was a therapist, so I did that job. And what's interesting is I didn't get the same burnout from being a therapist. even though I've dealt with much worse situations, if
Mm,
than that. But I
yeah.
think also part of it is that we're acting on many times someone else's decision,
Yep.
right? And we try to be part of the decision very hard. We try to be there throughout the life cycle of an employee. We try to coach the managers. We try to provide resources so that every termination is a thoughtful um, and compassionate termination. But in reality, that's not always what happens. And we eventually have to do what we're told. And I think that powerlessness is also difficult for me, for the HR professional.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and you're completely, I mean, in a perfect world, anyone that has to perform a termination, whether it's a manager or an HR, should take the day off beforehand. Um, and I used to do that with my team actually, in the previous workplace. If they had a termination they were going to be sitting in on, I would give them like half a day off the day before, because I recognize the emotional toil. Like it's difficult.
Yeah.
It's really, and if it ever becomes not difficult, I think honestly that's a problem. So the fact that it's difficult is a beautiful sign of humanity. It means you haven't lost the touch. I'm saying this sort of to all professionals listening who I think have this goal of like, one day I'm not going to feel anything when I fire someone. That's my ultimate goal. And I've, been doing this for 15 years. And I always tell people, no, that is not your ultimate goal.
Yeah.
Your ultimate goal, obviously, is to stay composed, because that's also the most compassionate thing for the person, and to do things in the most seamless, professional way. But it's not to not feel.
Yeah. And I don't want to be insensitive to the people who have lost their jobs, that like making it about me and the HR person, how I feel. I understand the person losing their job is also experiencing a wealth of emotions and hardships in this world with this current market. But I mean, I still really struggle with that. It never feels good. It never feels like a good outcome for me. That's like my worst outcome. I try to do everything I can to make sure that we're not in that situation, but some things are out of my control. You're right. And I'm powerless in that situation. And that's a really scary thing to admit as an HR leader, that I don't necessarily have the power over something.
Yeah, it's very scary, and it can also deplete you. I think that can also definitely be part of burnout if you're constantly feeling as though you're working towards initiatives, you're building systems, and then no one's following it, or it gets shot down last minute, and you're thinking, well, what power do I really have here?
Yeah.
And I think power is feeling agency is really, really important for people.
Yeah.
Um,
I think we can be like the most powerful function and also at the same time experience a sense of powerlessness. Like when we talk about my relationship with my CEO, with our employees, we've always described it. I describe it to them as it's a checks and balance. Like he doesn't
mhm,
have unfettered, as our CEO, technically he does actually have unfederated access, but he made the point to hire HR so that he had some
mm,
sort of balance. And so we
mhm,
laugh about it, but I'm like our government, like we're a system of checks and balances. Like I don't get to enact my agenda 100% of the time. And because he has given a lot of trust and faith in me, he doesn't always get to enact his agenda 100% of the
mm,
time. And it's like a
mhm,
beautiful partnership where I have realized there are things that I don't have power over, and there are other things I do have power over. And I like to spend my days mostly focusing on like, where can I use my power to enact good change at our organization rather than
mhm.
potentially dwell on the things that are outside of my control. I actually
Yeah.
think that like changed my mindset as a leader a lot in the last few years of what are my hills that I will die on. And there are
Mhm,
some that I absolutely will die on. And I had to
mhm,
learn to let go of a lot because I felt
mm.
like I was constantly fighting battles with previous CEOs or previous teams where I just felt like I could never win. And that was contributing to my burnout, where I just felt
Yeah.
powerless about everything. And so I
Oh,
think, sorry.
absolutely. I mean, you said a lot of things, but that partnership with the leader that you're working with in HR is uh, everything almost. That is what's going to determine whether or not you're going to be happy at your job.
Yeah.
And what you're describing there is a partnership, and the checks and balances is exactly how it should be. HR should be able to even bring up things that should change with leadership, and it should be respected, and it should not be retaliated against, because that is a valuable piece of information that a business, if a business wants to be successful, should thank HR for bringing up. Like,
Yep.
you cared enough to say something.
Yeah.
But I also just want to say something from earlier when we were talking about the termination, because it came to mind, in that I think it's very difficult to be both the person who is there to create systems, or maybe if you're a person of our HR, a team of one,
Yeah.
you are the person there supporting employees through their career, making sure that they have the support they need, perhaps even scheduling trainings for them, and like all this positive. But then also at the end of the day, being the one sitting and telling them you lost your job.
Yeah.
And that I do, from speaking to HR professionals, I do believe that that is very, very difficult, because you feel there's a dissonance within the same person who's, quote unquote, hand I held a month ago, or
Mm-hmm.
tried to navigate through a difficult situation at work, is now the same person I'm giving the most earth shattering news.
Yeah.
And I think that is a very, very difficult dual responsibility and dual reality that HR's sensitive, beautifully sensitive hearts have to deal with.
I feel like I'm in therapy right now. I say this in so many episodes, but I genuinely feel like when I thought about this episode and what I wanted to achieve, I actually got like really emotional thinking about this episode, because I was like, I don't want anyone to feel like we are not capable of like the world. Like, I do believe like so many people underestimate HR, their abilities, the people doing this work. And I think now we're seeing more people who have talked about how valuable HR is, how important these leaders are. And but I didn't want to like devalue us by being like, well, I'm just like tired sometimes of like doing this work and it's really hard. And here's this like complex, nuanced layer of this work that we do that nobody really seems to understand but each other. And then when you start explaining this to people, it's like they've never been in this role. So like they don't get it. They
Mm-hmm.
just like don't get how much we pour in to get
Mm-hmm.
sometimes so little given to us back.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, I
So,
think that's like many communities. And I think that it's important to respect that you're part of a community and you understand the lived reality of being part of that community, whatever that is. And that's why it's so important to stay humble and ask questions and say, oh, what is it really like? Whether it be, you're in HR, or you're part of the immigrant community, or you're part of any other community, that is their lived experience, and we have to respect and be curious. And I think that just the very fact that this podcast exists is a testament to the fact that HR is not just a complaining profession. We're not just sitting around saying like we're tired and no
yeah.
one appreciates us. We're here actively trying to look at ourselves, asking the tough questions. You started off asking a tough question.
Yeah.
That's the opposite of, just saying I'm tired. It's really trying to scrutinize the issue.
Yeah. And fix it. I don't want
And
anyone.
fix it.
Yeah. I mean, like, I envision a future where, like, the world of work is just so much better than it currently is, which is like kind of scary because right now that's like not what we're reading in the news, where they're saying like AI this and
Mm,
AI that in our workplaces. Like, I genuinely want work to be better for people in the future.
mm-hmm,
And I feel like we have the opportunity to do it. It's just
mm-hmm.
we also have to take care of ourselves. And
Absolutely.
I've given a lot to my career, and there are times where I look back and I'm like, I wish I would have given myself more
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
than given everybody else pieces of me that I could have held on to for myself.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then, I mean, also just the very fact that HR is always on, right? There's always this need for us. So these boundaries you're talking about is very difficult because there's a lot of urgent tasks. I think everybody can relate to this. Urgent,
Made
you
up.
know?
It was made up.
And actually I was going to mention, it's very interesting. I don't know if you know this, but in Australia, I think it was a couple of years ago where they made it, they allow, like, legally you can refuse to answer after hours.
Yeah.
And I mean, yes, right?
Absolutely.
I really, I wish the whole world would adopt that, and it's not going to hurt productivity and all these like scary things people think might happen. No, it's not. What it's going to do is going to preserve people's energy, HR professionals included. We're not going
Yeah.
to get like a red flag message at midnight, like we have to fire someone tomorrow,
Yeah.
and that's it.
But it's so
So.
funny you say that because like every time I'm like 4-day work week, I always get messages from like CEOs that are like, I don't believe in that. And I'm like, all right, don't believe in it. I'm not like, that is your prerogative. But we have seen the studies of like creating that balance, the time for people to go out and explore their creative minds and worlds leads them back to do better work. And so it's just this never ending disconnect, it feels like sometimes between like, we all instinctively know when you take care of yourself and you're healthy and you feel creatively fulfilled and challenged, like you're going to do better work, but then everything we do at work like kind of is like counterintuitive to that.
Yeah, yeah. And I
That,
think
that
companies say, yeah, I mean, companies will say like, we value your, like the work-life balance, or we want you to take, PTO, but then what is being modeled? What is happening in reality,
yeah,
obviously, is what really matters, because employees are not dumb. They know exactly what are the things that are being said and what is the actual culture and what's the actual truth behind that.
yeah. Okay, well, we've spent a lot of time together today. I've been on the brink of crying at least 3 times, would like to say. You just create a space where I feel very warm and my walls are down and I'm able to like be myself and be vulnerable about a lot of things that I feel. So thank you. But I want to
Mm-hmm.
end the episode kind of looking at 2 things I love doing, like asking for advice and looking to the future. So the first
Mm-hmm.
question of advice, what advice would you give HR people who are already experiencing burnout and feeling like they can't bounce back?
I mean, I love the question, because when someone is in that state, the most important thing you can actually do is to ask, is to reach out, right? So it's such a beautiful almost segment of like, if you are experiencing this, like, please don't do it alone. Reach out to me. I mean, reach out to you. I think reach out to someone. Um, but also, I want to make it very simple, because I think when you're in that state, complicated stuff doesn't enter mind. And so I actually thought a lot about that before today's episode. And I read a lot about burnout, and a lot of the things are like, oh, exercise that completes the stress cycle, or connection and things like that. And then I started thinking about children, and I
Mm,
promise I'll get back to the answer. It has a point. I thought about children, and we look at children. Oh, must be so nice to be a child. They have no
yeah.
cares in the world. They're taken care of, this and that. And then I thought, haha, maybe, but also they are engaging in all the positive behaviors
Mm,
that we need to engage in. And so that's the segment, is if you are in that state, I want you to think of a child, and I want you to think of how a child behaves. A child
mm,
runs around all day if they can, right? Physical exercise, endorphins. And also that does tell the body you are safe. Exercising is a beautiful way of doing it. So that's something children do all the time. Children all the time will reach out to try to create friendships and connections without
yes.
that fear of being judged. Okay, that's the second thing you should try to do, is to try to connect. Children are hugged all the time, hopefully. They
Mm,
should be, and loved, and physical touch, hugs from loved ones, or it is really, really important to like get through something very different, because again, you are telling the body that you are safe, and you're starting to process the stress that has been building up in your body. um,
yeah.
and so I think I wanted just to simplify it, and really just say like, look at children, how they behave, and then try to almost like reach your inner child, and be kind to yourself. One of the things, I think I might have mentioned it at breakfast to you, or I talked about it recently, was guilt. I think
Mm,
some HR professionals have burnout because, again, we didn't believe in the decision that was made, but yet we were the executioner of it. And we did it because we want to keep our job, not because we believed in it, not because it followed our value system. So I've almost seen people experience like post-traumatic stress because they were out there doing work they didn't believe in, but just, because they had to. So I think also just that kindness and starting to, if this is part of it, like forgive yourself for that and understand the context.
That's beautiful. I'm going to remind myself like to be a kid and to explore the things that I think the way that they see the world. Cause I do find myself saying a lot like, oh my God, it was so nice when I had no responsibilities. And I'm like, no, maybe I should just go embrace my inner child and go do that. And I think that's like a really good, simple step that doesn't feel like, one more boundary you have, one more thing you have to overcome to like address your burnout, right? Keep it simple.
Exactly. Yep.
That. My final question is a little bit of a future focused one. Looking ahead, what do you hope to see in HR culture when it comes to addressing burnout and like any steps organizations would take to prevent burnout at its roots?
Absolutely. I mean, I said it before. I think that the always on culture is very, very damaging. The fact that we have, the Slack going at midnight, we have emails that are coming in on our phones when we're on vacation. I think it's the number one thing that has contributed to burnout in I would say like the last 10 years, like how it's really, because again, like the boundary, even, keeping your bedroom clear of technology because your brain has to start getting ready for sleep. So all these like boundaries, and then also work from home or remote work, which I'm a fan of, absolutely. But it comes with its challenges because you're just, always on. And so I think that is really, really important that companies start to recognize that and start creating true boundaries, like what I mentioned about Australia and that law. That would be beautiful if companies actually said, we have no expectation of you answering your messages, after work hours.
Yeah.
And then I think also, I think that companies have to recognize that employees are bringing their humanity to work every day. And the successful companies are the ones that will recognize that in the proper way. The ones that close their eyes to it and will just not engage, the end result will not be positive at all. And I'm saying it knowing it's not easy. It's not easy at all. And at the same time, it's easy. It's easy. It's easy to treat people with kindness. It's easy to think of what a situation might be like for them when they walk through that door every single day.
Yeah. It's easy, but so many people struggle to do it well. Well, there's something to figure out there. This has been such a great episode. Honestly, like I said it earlier, I feel like I've been to therapy and back. I feel like I've cleansed some of my strongest feelings during this episode. It's just a reminder that I'm not alone in what I'm feeling. And you gave me some really good tips to think about the next time I haven't closed a stress cycle, or I still feel like I'm super burnt out and I can't figure out why, what I could potentially do. So I'm so thankful for our friendship. I'm so thankful every time I get to see you. We have like such good conversation, and I'm grateful for your friendship. And I'm just really happy that you were able to make time for us today on the I Hate It Here podcast, that you were able to share your wealth of knowledge with people. For those that are looking to get in touch with you, I always put LinkedIn in the show notes, but how can they reach out to you, work with you, get to know you better?
LinkedIn is perfect. I tried my best to answer, and I really, really encourage anyone to reach out. If anything, there's nothing, you don't have to sit and spend time like crafting like the perfect note at all. Just, hey, I want to connect. I'm expanding my community, or whatever else it is. I want to chat. I heard something that resonated with me and I want to chat. Absolutely open to connecting and providing a resource and expanding my community as well.
I love it. Thank you so, so much. And until next time, I'll see you soon, hopefully in New York. Big hugs all.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thanks for tuning in. Keep up with all the latest HR resources by subscribing on Apple, Spotify, Google, or wherever you listen. And if you love I Hate It Here, tell an HR friend. I'll see you next time.